come on. I love that, Judah Wickower. I used to live on Little Graves. So what are you thinking, J-Dubs? You want to run that intro? Ooh, we just got another share over there. Hello, Waynesboro and Mr. Simpson. Welcome to the broadcast. All right. Got the Daily Progress watching you? Yeah. All right. Ready, J-Dubs? Okay, give us a countdown. Guys, welcome to the I Love Seville show. My name is Jerry Miller. Thank you for joining us on a Tuesday. Sun is shining. The snow is melting. Great day to be alive, guys. We're live in Charlottesville, the Commonwealth, the country, and the world. We're presented by Ting Fiber Internet. Crazy fast internet, Ting Fiber Internet. Judah Wickower is our director. If we can go to the studio camera, we'll welcome Michael Payne to the studio and to the network. Michael, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, good afternoon. Glad to be here.
How are you?
Doing good.
Yeah? Where do you want to start? Why don't we start with, how about this? Q1, a little out of COVID. We still have a ways to go. How would you say State of the Union for Charlottesville is?
Yeah. Well, I think, in Charlottesville, like across the country, there's a lot of work to do. Like you said, we're still not out of the pandemic. The vaccine rollout is continuing. Obviously we don't have the supplies nationally that we would like to, but I think we've still been able to distribute the doses. None have gone to waste. It's ramping up, and I think that's going to allow for a bright spot, I think, over the next few months to sort of move out of this. But in the interim, we can't get COVID fatigue. We can, some schools are returning to in-person instruction. Little League sports and some other things may open up. But we can't let our guard down and get complacent, like we've seen at the rise in cases of UVA, because if we do, it may just set us back, if we have a large super spreader event that leads to community spread. But I think over the coming months, we'll slowly open up more. A lot of attention is going to need to go towards providing relief to people who have faced economic impacts. Obviously, the business community has been pretty devastated. But I think there could be a lot of opportunities if Congress passes the new stimulus bill. That'll open up a lot of money for us locally to invest in programs to help people recover and get back on their feet after COVID. And so I think that's kind of where we're at. I mean, I think we're turning the corner, entering a better space, but there's a lot of work to do. Again, COVID has had a big impact on families, businesses, the local budget, and it's going to take some time to recover from it for sure.
All right, so you already have a ton of comments coming in. We're going to save the comments and questions to the end of the interview. I will ask them to Councilor Michael Payne. Just before we talk shop, you are a year and change on the dais. No one predicted there was going to be a pandemic when you did this. How has it been just from a mental health standpoint, from a stress standpoint, from a sleeping standpoint? I believe you work nights, is that right?
I have. I'm not currently, but I had earlier in my term.
How's the mental health?
Yeah. Well, I think, there's no question. I think it's been very difficult for both council and staff. We know you're entering, especially in Charlottesville, a very engaged, tough environment, but you can't predict a pandemic, an economic crisis, social movements for change across the country, everything going on nationally. And it's very difficult. But I think like everyone, people are, they're more isolated than normal. People are, anxious. Their kids aren't able to go to school. People have lost their jobs. It's a very difficult environment, and it's difficult for counselors as well, especially because I think, everything going on, it seems like in the city, and not just in the city. I've noticed a lot of groups and organizations that, whatever it is with the anxiety, the isolation, that people have really turned against each other in a lot of ways. And, in the city, not just city government, government, but I think, again, a lot of groups, I've just seen people sort of turn against each other, and I don't know if it's, an outgrowth of everything in the pandemic and all its impacts, but I think that's definitely something that we have to move out of and think about how we can come together more and focus on positives, because it's been so relentlessly negative. It's a challenge, and there's a lot of positive stories to tell in the community, but when we're so focused on the negativity, those stories get overlooked, they don't get told, and I think it can snowball into greater negativity, certainly in city government. So, I hope that's something that we can sort of turn the page on and change that dynamic and focus on the positive things we've been doing. And there's a lot of them. There's always more work to do. Nothing's perfect, but we have a lot of things to celebrate as a city government. We've done a lot of things during this pandemic, a lot of non-pandemic work related to affordable housing, climate change that other localities aren't doing. That's something that that's a positive story we should be able to tell.
I've noticed with your social media, you've been emphasizing the positive with some of the stuff you've been posting, which I think is needed. From my side, and I think we contribute to the news cycle. From our side, I feel like we are just kind of responding to some of the stuff that's coming out.
Right.
And it catches everybody off guard. Maybe we'll save that for the end, because I want to talk about the main topic here, maybe West Main, the Market Street parking garage, school reconfiguration, and this budget. I watched the last meeting on Tuesday. First, give you props. It got testy. I thought you guys handled the testiness well. And then we started getting into the nitty-gritty of actual policy. And then West Main came up. And this looks like a 2-2 split with Councilor McGill as almost the deciding factor here on this West Main Streetscape project. Anywhere you want to go, open-ended, then I'll ask specifics on West Main, maybe a recap of what you said on Tuesday for council in the meeting.
Yeah. Well, to the first part, I think last meeting, is an example of kind of, especially on social media, how negativity can
go viral,
shadow everything.
Yeah.
Because obviously the beginning of the meeting, it was contentious. There was serious discussion going on, and that really flavored, I think, a lot of people's memory of it. But we also later that meeting we allocated $250,000 to rental relief for public housing residents. All of council was able to work together to get $20,000 to go to a community group who's working on gun violence prevention and conflict resolution. We got our draft affordable housing plan, which it was the final draft, and a really strong, serious plan. So just in that meeting alone, we had all these positive things happen, but it didn't. It's not what people really remembered or
it doesn't drive the news
on
cycle.
Social media. No,
yeah,
and it doesn't. I don't think it drives as much social media engagement. But that is what it is. But to the question of West Main, I mean, I think it's it's definitely a difficult issue. It's a project that's been underway for more than a decade, really.
Kathy Galvin was here, she said, since '88.
Yeah. And
she was here yesterday.
Yeah, and it's gotten a lot of smart scale money. So, if you abandon the project, you leave that smart scale money on the table. And you also need to know that corridor is going to require some level of investment, no matter what, because it has a lot of deferred maintenance because they anticipated West Main would happen. So I get the difficulty of it. I mean, what I would say is I think our budget is in a very difficult situation. Both because of the pandemic and because over the years, a lot of projects have been added to our CIP where bondable projects go. And it was easy to add things to it because if you add something to it, you don't need to immediately pay for it. It's not happening. So you can put something in it and say, we're doing that, we're taking action on it, and you don't need to worry about how to make it work in the budget. But all of a sudden, all those bills are coming due almost all at once. And then we've also had the pandemic, which has reduced revenues. So staff's analysis was everything in the CIP right now, if you include $50 million for school reconfiguration, and that could be closer to $100 million rather than 50. But if you just assume that it's just going to be 50 and everything in the CIP is as it is to afford it, at a minimum, over a 5-year period, we would need to increase the real estate tax by 10 cents or some equivalent of that level of revenue. It would deplete our debt service fund, and even if you did that, it would still leave no room for any new CIP projects. It would also freeze up most of the general fund, so you wouldn't have money to invest in departments or new staff positions. So when you're in that situation, you've got to prioritize and make tough decisions. And I see the vision of West Main. I would want to see it done. But when we look at the reality of the budget situation, I just can't prioritize it over schools, affordable housing, other basic infrastructure. And that project, which could be $20 to $30 million of city money, the deferred maintenance, the staff estimate is that would cost about $3 million. So you're looking at those kind of decisions. Now, if there was money from the federal government, in the new stimulus bill, if there was a way to, cut phase 4, get UVA, which pledged $5 million to put that into an earlier phase, and get the cost down to where it's close to that $3 to $5 million that's needed no matter what.
Because was UVA's $5 million for phase 3?
I think it was for phase 4. I'm not 100% sure, but it was not. It was stated in a letter. It was not like an MOU or formally fleshed out thing. So it's something they could be re-engaged with. And again, if we're able to do those things, cut phase 4, get UVA to make that commitment, and bring the cost down to similar to what the deferred maintenance is, no matter what, then I think it makes sense to do. But bigger picture, even if we were to zero out West Main Street and the parking garage, we still have a lot more work to do to make the budget work.
Talk to me about school reconfiguration. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so that's another thing that's been under discussion for, decade
forever.
Plus, forever.
Forever.
In this case, it's reconfiguring Buford and Walker, reconsolidating, and creating a shared space for preschool instruction. And so there's a consultant who pretty shortly should be finalizing sort of the initial estimates and scope of work for the plan, and that I think will help guide a lot of discussion, because right now we're sort of having to discuss it without any sense of like what draft plan there even is. So that's the goal, and again, a lot of people when they've looked at it, they've said, really, that's a project that could be $100 million plus. $50 million is definitely a lower, more conservative estimate of the cost. And we know we also have a lot of deferred maintenance in our schools. There's a lot of maintenance and upgrades that are going to be necessary no matter what. So I think, at our last council, if it wasn't our last council meeting or work session, Peter Krebs with the Piedmont Environmental Council, I think actually made a good point at the end of the meeting, and he said, we should look at what went wrong with West Main and think about from a project management standpoint how to improve that and apply that to the schools. In other words, don't say this is our total dollar amount, make whatever you want fit within it. Don't say do your dream project, we'll figure out the cost and figure it out. Instead, sort of figure out what are our goals, what are the specific things we want to accomplish from school reconfiguration, and work from those goals to get to the most cost-effective and best solution. And so I think once we get that, the initial estimates and plans, we're going to really need to have a lot of conversations between council and the school board and really dig into this thing and talk about it in a way that, at least in my time, just speaking for me personally, I have not had those deeper discussions with the school board and figure out, is this a project we want to phase? Do we want to do it all at once? How are we going to figure out the cost? If it's looking, at a $100 million price tag and thinking about the impact that's going to have on our revenue and the need for tax increases, get the school board involved in selling the community on that plan and the need for those revenue increases, and work from there. But, I still think we're sort of in an early stage of it in a way, even though so much work has gone into it. We're going to need to have a lot more discussions and just face the reality of our budget limitations, while again also acknowledging that our schools clearly have a lot of deferred maintenance and need investment no matter what. So we can't just say, we're not going to do it. We're going to wait 10 more years and see what happens. That's not going to be tenable either.
Play devil's advocate with you for the sake of a talk show. The money for the state could go away. We're not sure if the money that UVA would allocate to West Main, whether that could stay or go away if we don't do the project. The underground utilities need to be replaced, so we're going to be digging up the ground regardless. And the school reconfiguration is still a little ways away. We don't have tremendous clarity on that. Where the West Main project, we do have clarity and is quicker to a go or a start. Thoughts?
No, I mean, I think they're all fair points. And I think, something we've all talked with the new city manager, Chip Boyles, about is, if he can take a look at it, holistically and figure out, is there anything we can do, and think about it as a citywide picture with West Main Street. Because infrastructure and smart scale is really his wheelhouse. I mean,
yeah, that's how he cut his teeth.
Yeah, I mean that's what he was dealing with, every day on the Planning District Commission. So I'm sure he has a lot of thoughts. And again, if there's a way to make it happen that ends up saving us more money than it costs, I hope it's able to happen. All I'm saying is I just think we need to confront the reality of our budget situation. And we're in a budget situation where any decision we make, if you're saying, do this, you have two questions. What are we going to cut to make it happen?
But is it zero sum? Is it that binary?
There are ways to find solutions. I mean, for example, if you can cut Phase 4, get UVA's commitment to it, you can look at it big picture, especially if there's stimulus money from the federal government. But unfortunately, I think a lot of our budget decisions, especially this year, it is going to be, the reality of it is, if we spend this, what do we cut, or what's our revenue increase? And revenue increases aren't enough on their own. You're going to need to decide, if we make an investment, what are we going to cut? It's not a good situation. I'm certainly, I don't like it. But as a locality, we have a limited budget. We can't run deficits like the federal government. And the pandemic has really devastated local revenues.
Could you put that in perspective, how it's devastated, how much so?
Yeah, so at a minimum now, this year's budget revenues are projected to be $10 million lower than the original projection, and that original projection was already lowered from what was thought was going to happen.
So it's roughly a $200 million budget a year, roughly, right?
Yeah.
And then the initial projection, if memory serves correct, was it 10 or 15% below the 200, and now it's an additional 5% on the 10 or 15 initial projection.
Correct.
And so this is a serious deficit.
Correct. In the previous budget cycle, we had allocated money that would have gone to the debt service fund, around $10 million, and put that into a contingency reserve to handle revenue shortfalls. And now in that fund could be depleted, which means that money that would have gone to help finance bondable projects is now zeroed out and gone. So it's very difficult. The one thing I think could change the situation is the stimulus bill from the federal government. If that includes support for local and state governments, and it also includes something like the CARES Act, then we could be in a very different situation, and that I think could be a game changer. But until and unless that happens, unfortunately, we just have to confront a difficult budget reality because, again, unlike the federal government, we can't run a deficit. Our budget has to be balanced, and if it's not, your bond rating goes down.
If I'm reading the tea leaves correctly, and I'm basing this off this past Tuesday's meeting, I see Councilor Snook and Councilor Hill voting in favor of this. Yourself and Mayor Walker, no. Sean McGill on the fence. Reading the tea leaves, I think Councilor McGill is going to side with you guys, with Mayor Walker and with you. And unless someone comes to the table, and I guess I'm kind of alluding to UVA here, perhaps something that's been in the works since '88, this streetscape project on West Main, could go away. Mm-hmm. Is there any opportunity to negotiate with UVA to step up from a financial standpoint?
Well, we talked about that at the meeting, and certainly I have talked with the city manager about the possibility of engaging in that conversation.
Because they got money.
Yeah, and is there any way to figure out how we can do this and make this work? Because again, I see the value of it. I would want to see it happen and be able to make it work without a huge budget impact. But again, I would say the unfortunate reality is if we're talking about these projects, like when you're talking about like there's a strong case to be made for why there's a huge cost to not moving forward with West Main Street and what's lost. But the problem is you also need to think of it big picture and think about every single, because if we do West Main Street, another project is going to have to be sacrificed, and that same case could be made for that project. So you just have to evaluate the trade-offs between, what's lost on West Main Street versus what's lost if you can't do, redevelopment of Friendship Court or school reconfiguration or basic infrastructure investments on bridges or something.
But the devil's advocate play for you is that stretch of road is arguably the most important in the city of Charlottesville. And then also another point that also kind of supports that side, this is for the sake of a talk show, is the digging of the stuff on the ground that needs to happen. So we're going to make the investment into that area, regardless if it's a streetscape. We're going to make a portion of the investment into the area, regardless if it's a streetscape, right? Because of is it gas? Is it gas utilities? Something along. I know, rough. I don't know as much as you do. Is I guess what I'm saying.
Well, there's gas and utilities there, and there's the undergrounding of utilities, which is not something that is necessary, and that's like a third of the cost, I think, of the streetscape.
Right.
But again, the staff estimate for the deferred maintenance necessary, no matter what, is around $3 to $5 million, and the streetscape of city money is like at least $30 million. So, and again, I'm not saying I don't want to see it happen. I mean, if there's a way to get it done and engage UVA, cut phase 4, and get to a solution for it, I think it would be a good thing. We've just got to, but again, we just have to confront the brutal reality of our budget situation.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't fund it all.
This guy's being honest. I love it here on the show. We'll get to the comments here. Multiple folks have posted in the feed. Get Michael's take on the garage on Market Street. Another tough project here. We had Lloyd on the show, Councilor Snook, and his take, I think, said a lot. I mean, because this guy's an attorney, and he's saying maybe we consider not building the garage and we just go with the agreement with the spaces in the Market Street garage and give the county some money back for that land. And when Councilor Snook is making a comment like that, I'm like, whoa, this probably is not going to happen here. Anywhere you want to go on this topic?
Yeah. I would say the first thing is everyone is committed to meeting the agreement with the county.
Right.
We want to meet it. We're going to meet it. The question is, how do we meet it? And, I've had the position all along that I don't think a 300-space garage directly across from an existing parking garage is an investment that makes sense as a way to meet that agreement. We've got a surface lot there that already has, I believe, 67 spaces. The agreement calls for 90 spaces. If the goal is just to meet the agreement, removing 67 existing spaces to build a not 300-space parking garage when you could meet the agreement with just 20 or so more spaces does not make any sense. Now, I think there's a separate question, which I think is what has actually guided the drive to build a 300-space garage of we want more parking downtown generally, and we see this as an opportunity to build that additional parking. I think that is really driving the parking garage. But when it comes to meeting the agreement, I would definitely think there's a more cost-effective, sensible way to meet it. We don't need $15+ million for a 300-space garage. And that we don't know how much telework is going to be permanent after the pandemic, and I think it absolutely, at a minimum, makes sense to say, like, hold
wait
off.
and see.
Let's provide the county with the spaces they want to meet the deal, but hold off, see how the parking situation rebounds. And obviously we're still in the pandemic, but the usage of the parking garage has not gone up yet. I mean, there's someone who has scraped, they have a data visualization every day. It scrapes the data about usage of the garages. I mean, it's still flat. It hasn't gone up. And, it obviously will go up as we get out of the pandemic, but we don't know how many of these new office spaces are going to be more empty than they originally thought. And the final thing I would say is, I think we need to make data-driven decisions when we're thinking about how much money we're going to spend to evaluate what's the cost-benefit analysis. And parking is one of the areas where there's the biggest mismatch between people's perception and the data. I forget the exact numbers, but Richmond recently did a downtown parking study, and it looked at peak hours, the utilization of their parking spaces downtown. And it was something like at peak hours, peak hour, most used days of the year, only around 60% of the spaces downtown are used. At non-peak hours, you're looking at only 20 to 30% of parking spaces are used. And yet in the survey, something like over 70% of people said there's a parking shortage downtown. Yeah. I think we have a similar situation here in Charlottesville. The data does not show that there's a parking shortage. The last parking study we did, granted it was several years ago, explicitly did not recommend building new parking. It said we didn't have a parking space problem, we had a parking management problem. Yeah. And I think that's a reality. And again, you look at other cities, pedestrian traffic is what drives business in a downtown area, especially a pedestrian mall. And we don't have a parking shortage, and building a 300-space garage is not going to be the thing that helps businesses recover. There's just no data to support it. And I know there's a common perception that is against that, but I think we just need to make the decision based on the data. It's a healthy sign when you have a downtown where you can park, but not every single space is open.
Yeah, it shows activity. Devil's advocate then. Demand for parking returns, but we gave some of the spaces to Albemarle County and in the garage that's supposed to accommodate the demand. Thoughts? Well, then we act then, and we try to respond then?
You know, if that's the situation and there's clear data showing there's a parking shortage, then you act and figure out how to proceed to build sufficient parking spaces. The other thing I would say is, you know, there's a number of new office spaces that are coming online, but they are building parking. There is new parking being built.
323 is a good example.
In the downtown area. And yeah, I mean, you look at the data on the usage of the Market Street Garage and the Water Street Garage. There's only a few days a year when Market Street reaches capacity, things like Tom Tom Festival, some kind of event. But it does get near at peak hours on peak days, so Tuesdays, Wednesdays at noon, and then it goes down. But at that specific hour, you may have to drive to the top of it. But the Water Street Garage at peak hours, peak days, is only like 50 to 60% utilization. So the other question we have to ask ourselves, is it really a crisis if someone has to drive and park in the Water Street Garage versus the Market Street Garage? I would say it's not. Certainly not the level of crisis that justifies a $15 million investment when we're in this kind of budget crunch.
Michael Payne, well said. Last question on this topic and the parking management or mismanagement issue. How do we solve that then? Mm-hmm. And then to tag on to that question, have you felt out the Board of Supervisors from Albemarle County that they're okay with this alternative option, the option that was written into the deal?
Right. So Chip Boyle's engaged with a conversation with Albemarle County executive, and
he said that in the meeting.
Yeah, from what we heard, it was a positive conversation, and from their perspective, really all they're looking for is the parking spaces. They don't care how they're delivered. If they have the parking spaces, they're okay. And like you said, there are things explicitly written into the plan that allow for them to have parking spaces without a garage. So they're okay with that. They're just looking for the spaces. It was the other.
Well, you answered it. They were looking for the spaces, and Chip kind of assessed the temperature with the Board of Supervisors with this agreement. All right. So the final question is, Joe Plantania had some comments about this in the media today, that he's not going to pursue charges with Mayor Walker and the credit card policy. I mean, to a certain extent, what you said to begin the show, where you were hoping for some positivity from the community, we need to contribute that as well, because over the last, say, 2 or 3 weeks since she did the live on Super Bowl Sunday, I'll be straightforward. We undoubtedly here have contributed to that topic being in the news cycle much more prominent than it otherwise would. To our point, we would not have known about this if it was not for the Super Bowl Sunday Facebook Live. None of that details would have come out if the Facebook Live had not have happened. Now, I'll start open-ended like I have with every topic. What do you make of the entire credit card policy situation?
Sure. Well, I think Platania's letter speaks for itself. I mean, I think it just assesses the situation accurately. I don't think there is anything immoral or wrong done here. I don't think there's anything certainly not anything done that was criminal, certainly not anything that would warrant prosecution, and that's what Platania said in the letter. The issue is we have an outdated, bad policy. I mean, I think George W. Bush was still president the last time the policy was updated.
Richardson tried to update it.
Yeah, and
when he was here.
It's something that council should have done, and we didn't. And so we need to make it happen now, because the policy, it's unclear, it's old, And there are, unfortunately, limitations in Virginia with the Dillon rule. And I think all we need to do is just clean up the policy, streamline it, so there's not any gray area or uncertainty for staff and council. And I think we can do that in a way that still allows for council to support council initiatives and to provide support for people who are serving on boards and commissions in some cases, the same way the Planning Commission receives a small stipend for being on that board. And in fact, if we clean it up, we can make that happen in a clearer, more effective way and do more of it. And that's really all that needs to happen. So again, I don't really think anything was done here that was immoral or wrong, and again, certainly not criminal. It's just an old, outdated policy, and I think that's really where, in every conversation I've had with other counselors and the conversations we have heard from staff, that's really the only goal here is to update the old policy. There's certainly from my perspective, and I haven't heard from anyone else, there's no intention or effort to get anyone in trouble or to say that something wrong was done. It's just, we have a lot of outdated policies and procedures that we need to clean up to prevent gray areas for council and staff. And, it's one of the things that we have committed to and I think need to follow through on after we've had all these staff departures and the turnover in the city manager's office and throughout the organization. There's clearly a lot of organizational things we just need to clean up so we can govern better. And I think and I think we can do it quickly. And I think it can again be done in a way that still makes it totally possible to support council initiatives. And I think it's an easy fix, really.
You got the Progress, the Seville, CBS 19, and NBC 29 watching now. All right, that's the last I'll ask on credit cards. A couple more questions I want to ask. Props to you, and I gave you props when you did it, when you wrote the commentary that was published on Seville Tomorrow, where you were offering transparency and kind of some thinking and stabilizing the organization. I think that was in some ways almost the beginning of a fresh start, what you did. Then Lloyd also responded to that, Councilor Snook, by offering some perspective of what's happening as well. You led the charge. Then you guys brought Chip Boyles in as the city manager. Expectations for Chip, Mr. Boyles, Tuesday's council meeting, which I think was his first, Councilor Snook said, hey, no pressure, but you figure out a way to see if we can make this $15 million West Main Streetscape project work. And I was like, wow, Chip. Chip Boyles, anywhere you want to go.
Yeah, well, again, like I said in that article in Seville Tomorrow, we can't sugarcoat where we've been. I mean, the city organization has been in a bad place. We are not where we need to be. We're not where the community wants us to be, and it has ground to a halt so many things we need to do, and it's just overshadowed everything. So we have to confront that reality and begin the process of rebuilding and moving in a different direction, and I think that's starting. And again, I think it's important to focus on all the positive things that we are doing, that staff have been doing, and there's a lot of success stories to tell and build from there. And I think Chip is definitely committed to that and committed to trying to do what he can to bring together the team within City Hall, elevate the work they're doing, empower them to make positive changes and tell success stories they have in their departments, and work with them to figure out how to make this budget work. And I think his first priority is overwhelmingly to get the budget done and to get a strong budget that's balanced, figure out what we're going to do with the CIP this year, figure out how we can continue our support for affordable housing.
Fill some positions.
I think the number one thing is getting the budget done in the immediate term. The second thing is filling those positions.
How much vacancy is over there?
There's a significant amount of vacancies.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no deputy city managers. There's no HR director. There's no permanent NDS director.
How does it
There's
run?
No risk management.
How do we run without these people? Like, I have no idea.
It's the reality is you cannot operate firing on all cylinders. I think it forces staff to focus on what are our core functions that we have to do and figure out how do we get all our resources around accomplishing what we need to do. And then once you've done that, figure out what additional staff resources to work on some other initiatives, do creative new things, but there's no question around it. When you're in that situation, you are extremely limited of what you can do. It grinds things to a halt. It prevents you from starting new initiatives. It grinds to a halt things like our Civilian Police Review Board, the work that the Human Rights Commission has been trying to put forward. It slows down implementation of an affordable housing strategy and other things. So it has a real effect. And again, just a month or so ago, until, Chip came on, one or two other additional departures, I mean, we would have been looking at a situation like, can we get a budget done? Like, you might need to be worried about, is your trash going to be picked up? That's how bad it was. And fortunately, with Chip coming on, we're much more stable than we were. But we've got a big hole to dig out of. And I think the big thing we need to do is support the city manager, allow him to do his job, and give him the latitude and empowerment to rebuild, fill vacancies, make some procedural and operational changes, and just slowly start to get it to a better place, because it's a huge task. And again, number one thing, budget, but two is definitely filling those vacancies. Because that's something we haven't been able to do. A lot of people have left. A lot of people have been offered jobs and said, never mind.
Right, they took it and they never showed up.
Right, and I mean, there's no HR director. That's even harder to recruit
candidates. The search committee's piecing out.
The search firm was like, we can't.
We got to piece out.
So I mean, we're definitely in a better place and moving in a better direction, but it's a lot of work, and we've got to support the city manager to allow them to rebuild, because it's gonna take time. Unfortunately, the energy is going to have to, we've got to get first things first. We've got to rebuild that basic foundation before we're really able to do a lot of things like fully execute our affordable housing plan. I wish that wasn't the situation, but when you don't have assistant city managers, there's no housing coordinator, no permanent NDS director, it's just the reality.
Multiple people giving you props on the transparency today. I'm mindful of your time. Last question.
Sure.
Last question. And then Alex Erpy will join us, guys. This election is huge. We got 2 spots. From what we know, we got Juan Diego Wade, who's going on the record, saying he's going to run. Brian Pinkston's going to run again. Mayor Walker has said that she will run again. So right now we know 3 spots, 3 people for 2 spots. The folks that get elected at these 2 spots are going to be with you, and you obviously know this, you, Sina, and Councilor Stook, Councilor McGill, Councilor Stook, for what, 2 more years?
2 years.
And you guys are going to have to do potentially West Main. You guys are going to have to do potentially this Market Street garage fiasco, the school reconfiguration, this budget, take us out of COVID, figure out what the long game is for the city manager, help us hire all these spots. I mean, this election is huge.
It is, and some of the other things that will be happening over the next 1 to 2 years is the Police Civilian Review Board getting an executive director, getting their
executive
powers,
director of Police Civilian Review
Police
Board?
Civilian Review Board,
Okay.
getting their powers that are allowed by the General Assembly beginning in July, redevelopment of Friendship Court, redevelopment of public housing in Friendship Court, the zoning rewrite, the affordable housing plan, which includes all kind of different things. So there's, finally movement on the statues when that litigation is finished up. So
taking us out of COVID.
Taking us out of COVID. So there's definitely, over the next 2 to 4 years, there's going to be a tremendous amount of things that have happened, and there's going to be a lot of things. I think it's a lot of things that work that had been started years ago that is finally being executed. It's
like the finish line is this 2-year period coming up for a lot of stuff.
Right. So it's going to be a huge time, and the next council is definitely going to be very important to getting work done, and to understand exactly where these projects are, what it takes to get us to the finish line. Because on a lot of these projects are at the point where the advocacy has spurred the beginning of the work, and now it's the nuts and bolts of how do we execute it, finish it, get it over the finish line. And as we've seen, that's really difficult, and it's a lot of in the weeds, nuts and bolts thing that requires a lot of staff, a lot of collaboration with staff and council.
Are you picking a horse in this race, or 2 horses in this race?
They're
going to be sitting next to you for 2 years.
Right now, in any election, I want to see everyone who's running, see what their platforms are, before ever wading in. I ran with Brian Pinkston, know him well. I know Juan a little bit, not too well yet. Obviously, know Mayor Walker. I've worked with her, and I think someone else announced yesterday. I think.
Oh yeah. Did I miss that?
Yaz Washington, I believe, announced on social media.
Okay.
And there could be additional candidates. So again, I'm really waiting to see everyone who's running, see what their platforms are. I think I'm able to work with.
You can work with anybody.
Everybody who's running, and just really looking to what the policy platform is, and what your experience and approach is in order to executing the policy work that we've been beginning. Because exactly like you said, we've got a tremendous amount of work ahead of us. But I definitely agree. I think it's going to be an extremely important election, and I think people definitely need to pay attention, know what people's platforms are, figure out candidates we're running on, and certainly from my perspective, coming from the progressive community, a lot of progressives are very divided at this point. There's a lot of infighting. People need to figure out
both parties.
Yeah, maybe it's just everyone.
It's just COVID, right?
Yeah, maybe it's everyone is divided at each other's throats, infighting, but. We need to really figure out, progressives, people are committed to housing change, what it's going to mean and look like for us to unify and come together. Because I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The bottom line is everything we say that we care about, the change we wanted to see happen after the summer of 2017, redevelopment of public housing, Friendship Court, Police Civilian Review Board, our climate action planning process,
your
the
platform
zoning rewrite. All of it.
Yeah. Everything
we say we care about and want to see happen, certainly a month ago, was on the verge of collapse. And we're still in a situation where our ability to execute these things is in question. If we can't get it together, unify, rebuild the city organization, and execute these things. And the danger, I think, is if we can't get it together, govern, get these things done, people are going to say, this is what happens when you try to make change. Look at what happened when you try to change how things were done, invest in affordable housing.
It flopped. Is that what? That's
right.
What people would say.
Right.
Yeah.
It flopped. They couldn't do it. They can't govern. This is why we need to go back to focusing less on change. And I think that's the risk, and that's why we really need to come together. And I think it's everyone in the community wants to see change happen. But if we can't get to a better place, it can't happen. And so much of it has come close to falling apart. Now, I think we can get to a better place, bring things together, and things are moving in a better direction. But we can't sugarcoat the reality.
Why doesn't everybody talk like that? That was like the most real, authentic leadership ever.
I really don't know.
That was real.
I've thought a lot about how much social media has changed politics and the way people engage with each other, and I don't know if this is all of it. Certainly there's a lot of history of mistrust that leads to a lot of fighting, but I have really wondered how much social media, these algorithms designed to just whatever gets the most engagement, anger, polarization gets the most engagement, and how much it's really structuring how people think and talk about politics, and how much it's really leading people to really just hate each other.
Yeah, that's what's happening.
And scapegoat people and say that everything going wrong is you. There's nothing complex. There's
Line
no
in the
dynamics.
sand.
It's just, and I've definitely wondered how much, we've seen it happen nationally, but I've definitely wondered how much it influences what happens locally. And certainly the pandemic hasn't helped when people are online. I don't think there's any substitute for a face-to-face conversation to read people's intentions, know where they're at. And everyone being online has just fed this cycle of negativity, mistrust, anger, but it's not healthy and it's not conducive to doing anything positive.
Well, can I ask you? And I promise, last question here. With council, normally it's like you guys are sitting next to each other, like people, human connection. You see the person. With it being via Zoom or Skype or whatever it is technology you guys use, you're not next to the person. How does that impact the dynamic and interaction?
I don't think it's good, and I don't think it leads to a healthy team environment. Certainly like the new counselors, we have hardly even got to know any of the staff in person because it's been on Zoom except for like the first couple months. So it's harder to build those relationships. One of the things I really loved about running an advocacy was being at meetings, meeting people, having a face-to-face conversation. I'm not so big on digital communication. I mean, obviously I use social media to get stuff out there, but when it comes to communication, I just think it's a poor substitute. And all that's been gone. I mean, you can't meet with your constituents in person. You can't be at events meeting people, which is a big barrier. So I definitely think it's not conducive to a team environment, and there's no substitute for the face-to-face. And I mean, you look at the data about these elementary and middle school students who have been all online and the impact it has on their mental health, their development. I think it's the same for all age groups. When you're in a digital-only environment, it's not good for your mental health. It's not good for positive relationships with people. It's just not how we're meant to talk to people and live. And when you're just staring at a screen and it's people insulting each other and you can't read intentions, like, you're not going to get a healthy team environment. So I definitely think it's part of it. And we've got to get to a better space, and I think we can, but we've got to acknowledge like where we've been at, and acknowledge, I think, that in the pandemic, I mean, we've got 500,000 people who have now died at this point. We've got the Capitol riot, people breaking into it. We've got all the dysfunction nationally. We've got people whose kids can't go to school. Their businesses have closed. They lost their job. They don't know if they're going to be able to pay their rent and utilities. People are scared. People are anxious. People have been depressed. People have lost family members. We need to focus on positive. And when we have this level of negativity on all these groups organizing locally and how we function on council, it just feeds into it. And it's the exact opposite of what we need, because I think people have really been hurt by the pandemic. And I think it's going to take us years to know and understand the extent of how much damage has been done. And we've got to be able to come together to come out of it. And I think, and like you said, I definitely wonder the extent to which people have been attacking each other and at each other's throats is in some ways a product of the pandemic and the isolation. But again, we've got to get to a different space.
Michael Payne, this is one of the best interviews we've ever done. You were so real and honest, and all over people are saying authentic. Our buddy Keith is saying his transparency is leadership. And multiple people are saying this. And he's right about Yaz Washington. She announced yesterday, so I will reach out to Yaz to see if we can get her on the show. She announced yesterday her candidacy for city council. Good call on that. I missed that. Thank you. Is there anything else we should get out there? Anything I'm missing? The show is anything you want to say? The show's yours.
I guess one, I talked about it, but just reiterate, some positive things that happened just last council meeting: $250,000 for rental relief for public housing residents, final draft affordable housing plan. Planning Commission tonight is having a work session on the zoning rewrite. $20,000 went to violence prevention. The Buck Squad is doing a lot of work. That's another crisis that I think is a product of some of this stuff, is the historic rise in gun violence, which has been devastating. And they've been working on that. I mean, the stories of what's happened with gun violence, I mean, it's just heartrending how people have been impacted over the past year. So they've been doing that work. We got an update from city staff about a utility relief program that they were able to build from scratch. Average relief of over $300 for each person who needed it. Over $100,000 went to utility relief. That's just in the past week. We've had those positive things happen. And, I hope we can build on it and grow those seeds of change, but it's only going to happen if we're able to come together and focus on that work. But I think we can do it. And I guess the final thing would just be our budget cycle is underway. We've got a number of work sessions coming up. I'd really encourage everyone in the community to pay attention, get involved, figure out the specifics, because it's really going to take the whole community to figure out what we want to make our priorities and how we're going to make it happen. And the community needs to raise their voice, because when you need to make hard decisions with trade-offs, the community needs to make it clear what is our number one priority versus other things. So I hope people will pay attention and get involved there, and that we can just build on the positive work that's been happening in the past year.
I hope so too. Michael Payne, Charlottesville City Councilor, thank you for joining us.
Definitely. Anytime.
We're grateful. We're grateful.
Anytime.
J-Dubs, I'll reach out to Alex now. If we could help Councilor Payne out, that would be great. Thank you so much. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Alex Erpy here, moments away. He is the co-star of Today y Mañana, which airs on this network Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. Alex, you are live. Thank you, Michael. You too, Michael.
Hey, Jerry, how you doing?
I'm doing well, Alex. What'd you make of that interview with Michael Payne, Charlottesville City Councilor?
It was interesting. I especially liked the ending part. I caught the ending of it just on the importance of face-to-face. I'm a big believer of face-to-face communication. I was putting in the comments there, the word virtual, we use it now to mean tech, but it once meant almost the same, but not as good as. If I'm virtually a genius, I'm not actually a genius. So virtual communication is a substitute, but it's not as good as the real thing.
Well said.
And making sure we focus on that positivity.
Well said, Alex Erpy, CEO of Emergent Financial Services. This gentleman, along with the affable, likable, and approachable Xavier, hosts Today y Mañana on the I Love Seville Network, Thursdays at 10:15. My man, you got another show cooking that's going to be fantastic.
Yes. We delayed it a week with that. We planned that storm last week just to increase anticipation. We wanted to make sure people were even more excited. For Johnny Ornelas, he's got El Mariachi with Guadalajara, which when I had prepared for the interview with him, I went to go look at El Mariachi, all the things on his menu. Dang, I need to get out to Zion's Crossroads and go there because, everything looked good on that menu. He had the Mexican hot dogs, which I didn't even know that was a thing. But what was on those, it was like bacon and all these the spices, pico de gallo, on his hot dog, and I was like, dang, I need to actually get myself out there and try that. So it's really exciting. He does a lot so much for the community, really getting involved. So we're going to find out what he's up to, what his plans are. And then, of course, we got Fernando Dizon. He's Little Manila. And now he's going to be Manila. I think it's Manila Street.
That's right.
Is his name in
Dairy Market.
Dairy Market.
That's right.
Which I think they're looking at a March-ish opening there, so we're going to ask him about that, see what the transition's been from food truck catering to having spots and now to having an actual physical location in Dairy Market. We'll see what he's thinking, what his plans are for that.
What makes these two entrepreneurs, these two restaurateurs successful?
It's funny. I would say what strikes me a lot is the drive that they have, the passion, because this time you'll see some of the pictures of their food and stuff when we get them on the show. We'll have Judah share them so everyone can sort of see what they're doing. And what sort of came to mind is when I had Fernando send me some of his photos, I'm seeing just the smile on his face as he's cooking. He's in some of them like cooking. And I'm like, the smile on his face. He's not like looking at the camera. It's like candid shots of him cooking. Like, this man legitimately enjoys what he does. And you just see it with Johnny. His beautiful family, the way he cares about his family, the way he's just building that brand. You can tell when people enjoy what they do. I've said this going back to when I was in college. You could always tell a professor who didn't like what he taught and a professor who was absolutely in love with what he was teaching. And I think it's the same in every industry. It's the same in restaurants, whether it's financial, whether it's your kind of industry where you're in front of people. When someone loves what they do, you see it. And it just makes everything that they do, I think, more impactful, has a better connection with people, and it causes people to want to be around them and patronize their business.
Well said. Johnny Ornelas fits that mold without question. The man who owns the Guadalajara Fry Springs and El Mariachi in Zion's Crossroads. Can you put in perspective the guests you have on Thursday on Today y Mañana from a leadership, role model, mentor standpoint within the Central Virginia community, within the Latino and Hispanic community? Johnny Ornelas is big-time people here.
Oh, he is. No, absolutely. And he was just sharing some news again last week because they're always looking at changes in the restaurant industry and how different laws will impact it. He's always sharing information. Just last week, he was putting it out there. Be aware of how changes in laws, I think this one was state level, affect different industries. So he's always looking out for other restaurateurs, not just his own business, which is really a great way to look at it. That's how you build mentorship. It's not a competition where I get better because you've done worse. It's not a zero-sum game. True mentorship and I think true leadership is saying, all right, what can I do so that my growth empowers others' growth? And there's ways to do that. It's never me at the expense of others. It's always, all right, how can we grow together and really improve? And sometimes I think the best leadership, when I think of these two gentlemen, and just even a lot of the other guests we've had on, Bernardo and Lucrecia and Cristel, Noel, is sometimes there's leadership also just by doing. Like, you don't have to go out there and say, I'm a leader and doing this. It's
action.
It's your example is doing it. And it doesn't have to, and it's the example of starting a business as a Latino entrepreneur and putting your heart and soul into it, putting the effort in and becoming successful. That alone, I mean, we've said this at Forward Adelante for so many years now, that alone sends the message to so many other Latinos out there, oh, wow, I can do that too. Like, there's no reason I can't do that because I see that they have done it. You know, I see that others have been successful. And whether it's, and sometimes especially in fields and areas where maybe growing up, there were some Latinos who were like, that's not my field. Like financial services, you know, I mean, I think I was inspired to get into finance. My dad is in finance. You know, you look at people like Robert Rodriguez, he was our guest several weeks ago. He's a Latino that was in finance. So you see that, and as a Latino growing up, you're like, well, I can do that. There's no reason I can't be in that field. There's no restrictions preventing me from doing it. And sometimes that alone gives people the passion and the impetus that they need to take that next step and then become the successes themselves.
Alex, you were on fire today. Alex Erp, you know you're on fire. He knows that was good. CEO of Emergent Financial Services. I'd be remiss not to ask you a market question. A lot of red on the board today. NASDAQ down 2%. Tech sell-off is pretty dramatic right now. Dow and the S&P red too. What do you make? What do you make of all this? What do you make of the market right now? Where do you think the market's going to go?
My suspicion is, and I've been saying this for a little while, that we were kind of at a little bit of a disparity, I think, between where the market was priced and the actual underlying economy. Because in any year other than COVID, you would look back at 2020 and say, that's a 6% recession.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that it was down 32% and then came all the way back, we feel much better about it. We don't look at 2020 and say, oh my goodness, it was a 6% recession. We look back and say, all right, we recovered on our way back from something that was devastating economically, right? And so I think that's part of the equation, and we may have some ways yet to go on this. One thing I always like to keep in mind is that there's two ways to look at market crashes. There's the panic way of I have to sell because the market is crashing, and then there's the relaxed way, which is this is an opportunity to buy, right? And it's why I always tend, my philosophy, and it's sort of the firm philosophy I think with that we work with at Emergent, is always to look at how much income are we generating in terms of dividends, interest, because those are your opportunities to buy more when the market goes down. Like if I've invested all my cash into stocks and they pay nothing, right, and the market goes down 30%, I don't really have more cash to put in. That's all invested. If I'm invested in at least some part of my portfolio that has some kind of interest or some kind of dividend that's paying at least quarterly, hopefully monthly, well, now when a market crash like this comes, I have some kind of cash bundle that I can then reinvest into the market and at a lower price, which is just really that you always want to sell high, buy low, and just keeping a slow and steady rate over time does that. It's I know we're all captivated, especially last year. I can't tell you how many people, there's the captivation and the excitement of the Teslas. I think Plug Power went up 600%.
I mean, a lot of plugs going down now. Tesla, you brought up. Down. Tesla's negative for 2021.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so that happens. I mean, when you have a second half like last year, there is definitely the thrill of seeing something go up massively and to have game-changing technologies. I mean, no one's denying that if Tesla and Plug and some of these other companies succeed at what they are working at, you may be talking game-changing technologies for the future. And so that is exciting. I don't discourage people from doing that. My philosophy, however, is always there's that, but you also have to keep in mind that long-term perspective, and the fact that what do we trust most of all in the economy? And I still believe it's people. I believe that it's the people of countries that I trust most, even more so than individual stocks or individual ideas. I trust the ideas of a whole country or countries, in different places of the world, working together to do something. And because of that, I still like a lot of my portfolio to be, and at least our clients' portfolios, to be in diversified, like be in everything, have a little bit of everything. Because you know what? Then your bucket, 80% of your savings are in the people of the United States or the people of India, the people of other places. And that's where I think the long-term growth comes from. And then we can have some fun with that other maybe 2 to 4% of the portfolio and say, okay, yes, I'm gonna put that little Bitcoin bit in. I'm gonna buy some Tesla. I'm gonna do something that I believe in, and put it in there because I know that deep down, like in the core of my portfolio, in the core of our client's portfolio, is an investment in people, in a whole group of people that we trust.
Alex Erpe, you just hit a grand slam, dude. You represented Emergent Financial Services extremely well, and your family extremely well right there. He's the CEO of Emergent Financial Services. I'll say it again, Emergent Financial Services. He and Xavier, his father, host an entertaining and informative show that spotlights the entrepreneurial community in Charlottesville and Central Virginia, the Hispanic and Latino community in Charlottesville and Central Virginia. It airs Thursdays at 10:15 a.m. on the I Love CVille network. It's presented by Emergent Financial Services. My friend, I cannot wait for Thursday's show. I cannot wait to see Johnny Ornalis in particular, and hear Xavier and what he's got cooking as well. Please tell him. Please tell Xavier I said hello.
Will do. I know he's done a lot cooking for this one. I think he'll have some fun things to say. We'll have a fun talk.
Every show he has surpassed expectations. I cannot wait for Thursday. Thank you, Alex.
You have a great one.
You too, Alex Erpe. Today was a fantastic show, right? We have a frank conversation with the Charlottesville City Councilor, and we have just a phenomenal evangelist for Charlottesville and Central Virginia, and Alex Erpe on today's program. That's the program. That's the show. We talk real stuff on this network. Judah Wickhauer is the director. My name is Jerry Miller. This is the I Love CVille show, presented by Ting Fiber Internet, crazy fast internet with Ting. You get the best deal possible through I Love CVille at ilovecville.com. ilovecville.ting.com. Is that what it is, Judah? Thank you very much, Judah. ilovecville.ting.com. I'll give it to you again. ilovecville.ting.com. And you can save $288 on the best internet out there, the internet that powers this network. You guys have a good afternoon. Take care.